Welcome to Natural Vlogarithm, my YouTube channel where, every 3 months or so when I find the time, I talk about math, science, and natural history. My name is Cody, and today I'm going to do a video that I've been thinking about making for a long time, and it's a pretty personal one. I made this channel because I found science in the world around me too beautiful not to celebrate with other people. But for a huge chunk of my life, I avoided science. And that makes me really sad. Here's the idea. Christians, if you take issue with the idea of evolution, I'd like you to take a second look at the evidence using some other sources. Hear me out. I'm going to explain why I think you should. I'm not looking to prove anything or disprove anything here. It's my only goal. I want you to take a second look. First off, let's get one thing out of the way. This is not a religious issue. Science often gets conflated with atheism or this false dichotomy of science versus religion. It's bull. It's a distraction. Just take Francis Collins, director of the Human Genome Project and the National Institute of Health. You really don't get more distinguished in science. Collins, like most any relevant practicing biologist, is a proponent of Darwinian evolution and rejects intelligent design. He's also an evangelical Christian, a best-selling apologetic author, a huge fan of C.S. Lewis, and an abortion opponent. He seems like a contradiction, right? I disagree. Francis Collins is a biologist. It's his job to follow the evidence in his line of work, and that's what he does. He's also a Christian, and science has nothing to say about the spiritual or the metaphysical. So there's no conflict. There's no issue. There's something else we need to tackle before moving forward. If you can't get behind this quote from Italian Cardinal Caesar Baronius, well, then we're probably not going to agree in this video, period. The quote goes like this: "The Bible tells us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go." I get it, it's a little hard to consider. I once took real issue with this quote as well. We're talking about something you consider to be the inerrant word of God, yet there are verses in the Bible that say unscientific things, and I think you would agree they're unscientific, and I also think you would agree with me on how to interpret these verses. "And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also." Genesis 1:16. We know the moon is not a source of light. It reflects light from the sun. And I'm not being nitpicky when I choose this verse either. In earlier times, people really did believe the moon was a source of light. And this is echoed in other verses of the Bible. "For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine." Isaiah 13:10. There are also verses that support the idea of a flat earth, and the idea that the earth is the center of our solar system. "And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth." Isaiah 11:12. If I had to guess what you're thinking right now, you're probably thinking these verses are metaphorical, they're being poetic, they're not intended to have anything to say about science. And I agree with you. They shouldn't be held to some impossible standard. And back when the Bible was written, we knew less about the world, and that would naturally affect the language that would be used when someone's being poetic or metaphorical. Here's the real question: what other verses could be described the same way? These verses were used as evidence to defend mistruths in the past. Could we be doing the same now? Could it be that there are other verses we are taking as evidence that we're actually taking in the wrong context? Could there be elements to the Genesis account that are actually poetic, that maybe we shouldn't be taking as scientific proclamation? If you agree that the earth is round, that the sun is the center of our solar system, and that the moon simply reflects the light of the sun, I think you have to consider that maybe, just maybe, this is a possibility. I don't even think this undermines a literal interpretation of the Bible. We're simply letting metaphors be metaphors, parables be parables, and songs be songs. For our next order of business, I have to go on the attack a little bit and talk about some of the arguments used for creationism, intelligent design, and teach the controversy. I'm not going to sit here and debunk every argument. There are too many, and there are people much better suited than I to do that. But what I would like to do is explain why there is good reason to be skeptical of these arguments. I think we can typically separate them into two categories. The first set contains the arguments that make no positive claim, but instead criticize evolutionary theory, or, much more often, criticize misinterpretations of evolutionary theory. This is a hard one to tackle briefly because, again, there are so many arguments used, but they do all fall flat. It seems to me that the majority of these arguments rely on willful ignorance. A simple example is the claim that evolution is only a theory. This is a claim made by many professional evangelists and even alleged scientists. If they've ever had contact with a real scientist or scientifically literate person in their career, they've been corrected on this. The word has a completely different meaning in science than when used in everyday language. Gravity is a theory. The idea that germs cause disease is a theory. The word only does not belong in front of the word theory when used in a scientific context. These people know this, and they continue to use this argument. It's intellectually dishonest. It makes me sad, and yet this one actually makes me sadder. The argument that there are no transitional fossils, no transitional forms, there are tons, and every time we find a new one, that creates 2 more gaps for creationists to complain about. That argument allows proof for evolution to be used against it, assuming you are willing to ignore the evidence. I told you I can't go through every argument, that's where I'm going to stop. But I'm sure you know it's very easy to simply say something doesn't exist, or to say certain evidence is unimportant and thus we can ignore it. You can do that for literally anything. All you have to do is be willing to cover your eyes in case that thing really does turn out to be true. If you have never read the literature defending the claims of scientists, you have no idea how legitimate criticisms of these claims are. You're ultimately just taking someone at their word, and you and I both know that's often unwise. Wouldn't you rather take God at his word? If he's given us these tools of logic, particularly the scientific method based on testability and reproducibility, where we can see truths verified right in front of our eyes, doesn't he expect us to use them? Isn't that perhaps a sufficient, if not ideal way to listen to the voice of God? I see a refusal to use these tools as tantamount to plucking out your eyes for fear of what you might see. It's not only terrible for you, it also shows an incredible lack of gratitude for such a gift as eyes. Why does this tie into a discussion about logic and the scientific process? It's because these tools aren't used in creation science. It doesn't use the scientific method. And the scientific method I'm talking about is a beautiful display of faith in the tools that we have been gifted and their ability to interpret the truth. It starts with deduction, the same method behind mathematical truths. We disprove all these potential causes of events until, well, really only one likely cause remains. All this is done on grounds of testability and reproducibility. If you make a claim, I can test it. We can hold each other accountable. And this is where peer review comes in. We are much stronger as a group than as individuals. We're even stronger when there's just a little bit of competition. When a scientist can achieve fame and glory for overturning consensus ideas, there is incentive for weeding out mistruths. Creation science does all of this backwards. These individuals start with something they are trying to prove, and then they find and display evidence that supports that claim. This is a simple logical fallacy called cherry picking. You can prove anything this way. It's intellectually dishonest. I'm going to put my faith in the scientific process that has given us literally every wonder of technology we have today. For a believer, it's a window into the wonders of creation. Cherry picking is a wall of your own creation. There are other problems with this second category of arguments, but there's only one more I'd like to discuss here. Due to the massive incentive for scientists to overturn consensus ideas, one has to believe in a massive conspiracy in order to believe that evolution has no evidentiary support. We're talking a worldwide conspiracy involving millions of people. I can assure you from experience, there are no such backroom dealings. It was a belief in this conspiracy that led me, a child who was absolutely passionate about discovering the world around me, to stay away from the scientific field for 2 decades of my life. Fortunately, I also had a passion that I believe I share with a lot of you. That is a passion for service. In junior high, I dedicated my life to missionary work, but I wanted to be very sure that in whatever I did, I was doing the most good possible. I felt it was my calling, and in many ways, I still do. It was not until graduating with my degree, about to start applying for master's programs in missionary work, that I started to realize the degree to which science could benefit the world. It started with the science of economics, when I read a book called The End of Poverty by Jeffrey Sachs. It was not long after that I discovered the work of Norman Borlaug. You've probably never heard of him, but he nearly saved more lives than any other person in human history. Some estimate nearly 1 billion lives saved from starvation, mostly in the third world, through crossbreeding techniques he applied to wheat, ultimately an application of the scientific process. Who saved the most people? Scientists, to be sure, probably Fritz Haber and Carl Bosch, who developed synthetic fertilizer. We're talking about an incredibly powerful tool for service to be used by those who care about the meek and the poor. By attacking both the scientific process as well as essential underlying concepts in biology, geology, chemistry, and physics, creation scientists are not only turning people away from a beautiful window into the mind of God, they are also turning people away from an essential tool for helping those whom Jesus cared about the most. A Christian who accepts Darwinian evolution is not a contradiction. In fact, it may be the ultimate pairing when it comes to being a force for good in the world. And that is why I implore you to take a look at some evidence from the other side. If you're looking for a place to start, Neil Shubin's Your Inner Fish is an illustrative and friendly read, but I also have to recommend The Greatest Show on Earth by Richard Dawkins. I know, he's antagonistic, he's gonna get some jabs in at religion in this book, but very few as far as Richard Dawkins is concerned. It's a science book, and it is by far the best book out there when it comes to laying out the evidence for a general audience. Neil Shubin also has a documentary on PBS based on the book Your Inner Fish. It's great, but I really would encourage you to read the evidence. I always say, if you want a worldview that's 95% wrong, get all your information from documentaries. Anyway, thank you for hearing me out. I look forward to the conversations I'm sure I'm about to have.